All right, so today I'm going to be talking about the ideology of Hungarian Hasidim. And well, my research is not about Leopold Cohn, but we'll try to kind of portray the world which he has left. And maybe it would give us the ideological world that he has left behind him, and maybe it will give us some ideas of the choices that he has made, which seem very radical, leaving the Hasidic world and moving into the Christian world. And maybe the leap is not that uh, big because of the world in which he has left and the ideological settings in which he has come from. Okay, so let's talk first about ultra-orthodoxy. And the first person I would like to mention here is Jacob Cutz. He's a famous historian of modern Jewish civilization in Europe, and he wrote also important books on ultra-orthodoxy and Orthodox Jews overall. By the way, the picture that you see here is do you identify them? Yeah, these are not real Orthodox. These are actors. Yeah, these are actors, and there's a wonderful Israeli TV program called Shtisel, and you can watch it on Netflix. Okay, so ultra-Orthodoxy emerged as a movement in Judaism in the late 18th century, once new options developed for Jews that were not traditional. Yes, so there have been Maskilim, the Enlightenment, there was the Reform movement, there was secularism. So all kinds of options developed for Jews, which were not available for them prior to that. And as a result, Orthodoxy came as a counter movement to block and to try to save and protect the Jewish community from all these changes that were taking place. And so they called themselves Orthodox. This is the term that they have used for themselves. And so their ideology was to preserve and protect the old ways against any changes that might come and opportunities that might develop for Jews in the world in which they were living in the late 18th century. This was the period. This was the period in which, in some places in Europe, like in Germany, in France, in Hungary later, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, Jews received civil rights and became full equal citizens of new states that were coming up in that point. So, and the last point that I put here on this slide, that Orthodoxy developed a sense of superiority. So what does it mean? It means that Orthodox developed this self-conscious in which they saw themselves as the best Jews. So there are all kinds of this. There was like a ranking system by which many Jews basically decided not to live according to the traditional lifestyle anymore when these opportunities came to them. But in their eyes, they were viewed as lower level kind of Jewishness. Yes, whereas being Orthodox and living a halachic lifestyle is considered the best. Okay, so I'm quoting here also another scholar of Orthodoxy that kind of tried to identify what Orthodoxy, what are the main aspects of Jewish Orthodoxy, and this is what he have said. Moshe Samet, Orthodox tend to separate itself from the larger community. And we can see it here if you go outside and you see the ultra-Orthodox communities in the streets of Brooklyn. You see this mechanism of separation, yes, to live. Sociologists call it enclave. Yes, this is the enclave in which Orthodox try to protect itself from the greater community by living within a tight community inside. Orthodoxy view modern culture with the utmost suspicion, yes. And you can see it outside in the streets of Brooklyn. You know, I don't need to explain it that much. You know, the fact that they are wearing these black clothes. It is, this is their statement that they are against change. Orthodox Jews adopt the ultra-strict standard of observance with respect to the halacha, which is the Jewish law, yes. They're really performing Jewish law in very strict ways, which scholars who study Orthodoxy can say that Jews in the medieval times and were not as strict as Orthodox Jews are today. This is much more stricter in the performance of the halacha. And under Orthodox inspiration, yeshivot for children and adults for advanced study were established. Yes, so the yeshiva became the center of the Orthodox world. Okay, so we are talking again about the end of the 19th century. Different branches of Orthodoxy developed in different locations, and I've used this picture here, which shows the Orthodox Jews resisting. Yes, because this is the point I want to make, that the resistance to change. So this is not necessarily resisting change, but this is resisting. Yes, Orthodox Jews resisting something. So this is why I chose this picture. But so in Germany, the type of orthodoxy that has been developed was called neo-orthodoxy, which meant modern orthodoxy. The tenets of this movement says that there is a way in which a Jew can be halachically correct and also open to the modern lifestyle. So there can be some middle ground between the two. And many Orthodox Jews who lived in Germany actually went to study modern professions like law and medicine and so on, which for them, they were able to try to find the middle ground. So today we call this movement modern orthodoxy. It's very prominent actually here in New York. By the way, they say the study that of all movements of Judaism today in the United States, modern orthodoxy is the wealthiest of them all. You know, this is a study that recently was made, so because many of them are actually lawyers and doctors and all that, but they are still keeping the Orthodox lifestyle. The second movement that has developed in Russia is called Ultraorthodoxy. I'm using here the language of, well, there's a scholar who's, doesn't matter. Okay, Ultraorthodoxy. So in Russia, the idea was that the modern world is viewed in a negative term, but there is an understanding that there should be some practical accommodation to the modern world and modern lifestyle. And so overall, the attitude was that modernity had to be resisted and there should be a struggle against modernity, but there should be some level of accommodation to changes. This is the Russian model, and then there was the Hungarian model, which is going to be the subject of this conversation today, which is the total opposition to any type of change. So this is why I chose this picture, yes, resistance to change. So this is resistance, not necessarily for change, but resistance to change was the motto of the Hungarian Orthodoxy. So the famous slogan that came from the schools of Hungarian Orthodoxy is, I say it in Hebrew first, Chadash Asur me'aTorah. Everything that is new is prohibited according to the Torah, according to Jewish law. And this slogan is associated with the leader of Hungarian Orthodoxy, Rabbi Moshe Sofer, also known as the Khatam Sofer. And this kind of tells us the attitude of Orthodox in Hungary. And Dr. Karen yesterday spoke a little bit about it as well. Yeah, so a very negative view toward the changes that the modern world has brought into the Jewish life. In 1886, the Hungarian Jews received their emancipation, meaning that they have become equal citizens in the Hungarian state. And the state asked the Jews to establish an institution that would represent them as a minority inside the mechanism of this new state, as other minorities were asked to do the same. And at this point, this was the point in which the Orthodox in Hungary decided and basically came back to the state and said, we cannot sit in the same room with the reformers and with the modern Jews. We cannot join the same institution. And this was the point in which, for the first time, a schism was established in Jewish history inside the Jewish community, where there are two groups were established, the modern and the anti-modern, and they cannot sit together in the same room. Today, this is very typical. Yes, the Orthodox will not sit in the same room with Reform, with Conservative. This is the norm. Yes, but this was the first time it happened in Jewish history. And the government accepted their plea and allowed them to establish their own institution, which was strictly Orthodox. Yes. So I would like to say a few words about Messianism, because now we want to move forward in our conversation. And you see the picture here, yes? This is a picture I took this summer in Tel Aviv. This is, I saw it. So while I was driving, I asked my wife to take a picture of it. So she's the photographer. And you can already see what it says. And I guess you understand what this billboard says, yes? This is the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This is the picture of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Chabad. And you're probably familiar with Chabad from the streets of Brooklyn. And it says in a clear language, Messiah. The Lubavitcher Rebbe died in 1994, for those who agree that he is dead, yes? It's like Elvis. There is a dispute about that, you know, if he's still dead, or if he's dead, or if he's still dead, or and so on. And this was the last big episode in which Hasidic Jews fell into the notion of Messianism. So let's talk about Hasidic Judaism. So Hasidic Judaism is the movement that was established in the eastern parts of Europe during the 18th century in Poland and in other places after the fall of the Sabbatian movement. So I don't know how much you're familiar with Sabbatianism. And this was a movement that, Sabbatianism was a movement that followed the leadership of Shabtai Tzvi, who in the year 1666 crowned himself to be the Jewish Messiah. The fall of the Sabbatian movement was hard and was brutal. Shabtai Tzvi, the leader of this movement, eventually converted to Islam. But at some point during the high period of Sabbatianism, it had about 1 million followers. And it created a large crisis in the Jewish communities with the decline of that movement, that came with the conversion of Shabtai Tzvi. Hasidic Judaism was established 100 years after the Shabtai Tzvi's episode, and have taken and learned its lessons from the episode of Shabtai Tzvi. So when this movement was established, scholars agree it did not have any messianic component to it. Yes, the Hasidim did not see themselves as leading in their actions toward the end of days. So there are two major scholars of Hasidim who tell us put the narrative of Hasidut in the big picture of Jewish history. So the first one that I'm going to quote is called Gershom Scholem. You might have heard of him. He's the great scholar of Jewish Kabbalah and Jewish Messianism. And this is how Scholem explained Hasidut. He said the Hasidim had neutralized the apocalyptic and collective fervor of Messianic thought as manifested in the Sabbatian movement. Okay, so neutralized, this is the key here. They took the fervor, they took the enthusiasm, they took the, all that came with Sabbatianism, but without the Messianism, without Shabtai Tzvi as a Messianic figure. Moshe Idel, whom I studied under, had a different take on it. And he said the central theme of the first two generations of Hasidim was the spiritualization of the Messianic age. In later generations, the movement tended more to the collective, apocalyptic, and acute end of the Messianic spectrum. Okay, so Idel says, you should look at it from a nuanced perspective. At the beginning, Hasidic Judaism was indeed, he said, spiritualization of the Messianic age. What does it mean? It means that the end of days, or the Messianic days, are not something that would happen on the external level, but inside your own self, meaning you can reach your own salvation, you can reach redemption by yourself to yourself. It's a personal redemption rather than collective redemption. So this is how Idel explained, how they took the messianism of Sabbatianism and transferred it from the collective to the personal, to the spiritual. And but later on, this movement became more concentrated on the collective redemption, and this is why we can see the Chabad movement coming out like that and saying the end of days is something that can be achieved, it has been achieved, and the leader, the Rabbi, is the Messiah. Okay, so when we look at the spectrum of Orthodox thinkers at the beginning of the 20th century, at the end of the 19th century, we see that many of them would argue that the current days in which they are living in are really representing the end of days. This is the last generation, the last period of time before the coming of the Messiah, when it comes to a collective messianic end. And I think this was a very common intellectual argument among Orthodox Jews at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. I've collected so many statements by leading Orthodox rabbis that have been making this argument that they are living at the end of days. And if you want to summarize these arguments, I can put them in two categories: the optimists and the pessimists. And the man that we see in the picture above, the first one, this is a Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Abraham Isaac Kook. An important rabbi from Lithuania that eventually emigrated to mandatory Palestine and served as the first chief rabbi of the Zionist movement. He belongs, and he kind of crystallized the optimist argument of Messianism. And the man underneath him with the picture, his name is Elchanan Bunim Wasserman. He was a Polish rabbi, and he kind of made the argument for the pessimist view of history. So the optimist was crystallized in the religious Zionist arguments that which views the rise of Jewish nationalism, yes, the Zionist movement, as representing the first, how do you say it, pangs, first pangs of redemption, which means the beginning of a Messianic process. So the optimist said, we are living now in the last generations before the coming of the Messiah. These are really, indeed, the end of days. This is a period of the end of days, literally the end of days. But instead of a messianic end that comes as a miracle, you know, through God's hands and through God's powers, as an event that will take place, you know, outside of history. No, this is the end of days would come through a gradual process that starts with the Zionist movement, with the establishment of the Zionist movement and Jewish immigration from Europe to the land of Israel, and establishing a Jewish state and establishing Jewish institutions of government. All this would lead in stages to the end of days. So the Zionist movement represents the first step, but then there will be other steps. And eventually, the Zionist movement would build a temple for God and would reinstitute the Sanhedrin and reinstall the monarchy and all of that are expected to happen at the end of days. So it will go through the natural process instead of the miraculous apocalyptic process. So this is the optimist. The pessimist, radical orthodoxy, or Dr. Karen called it extreme orthodoxy, and we have a disagreement on terminology, but not on content, viewed the modern times as a period of distress and spiritual decline. The fact that so many Jews decided to live the Orthodox lifestyle, the traditional lifestyle, that so many Jews became socialist and communist and secularist and reform and Zionist and Bundist, and those who remain traditional and loyal to the Jewish law, those are such a small minority. For them, this was the clearest sign that the end of days is indeed an event that's going to come soon, but it would come as a tragedy rather than, you know, as something optimistic and so on. Okay, so now the concept. I want to talk a little bit about this man, Akiva Yosef Schlesinger, and the reason why I picked him is because he actually comes from the same background as Leopold Cohn. He was Hungarian. He studied in the same yeshiva, Pressburg Yeshiva, at the same period of time, more or less, as Leopold Cohn, and he articulated the ideology of extreme orthodoxy. So we can assume that Leopold Cohn, when he was a student at the yeshiva, he might have learned with him, he might have been, maybe they shared a room, I don't know. More or less, it's the same period of time. More or less, it's the same place. And Akiva Yosef Schlesinger is considered one of the big ideological leaders of this movement, of this community of extreme orthodoxy. And we're going to concentrate here in the pessimistic, you know, view of redemption. So Akiva Yosef Schlesinger, he was ordained to the rabbinate in 1857 in Pressburg Yeshiva by Rabbi Avraham Shmuel Binyamin Sofer, the Ktav Sofer, the son of the famous Khatam Sofer, who said that everything that is new is prohibited according to the Torah. His son. In 1970, he emigrated to Palestine. He was among the founders of the colony Petach Tikva. Today, Petach Tikva is a big city in Israel with hundreds of thousands of people. And in 1863, he published his famous book, Lev Ivri, the heart of the Hebrew. So I was looking online to find a picture, and this is the picture I found. Hopefully this is really indeed Akiva Yosef Schlesinger. You know, you can't really trust the internet too much. But let's assume that this is how he looked like, more or less. So this is an old picture. So this is like the first page of the opening page of this book. And so the book opens with an attack on Moses Mendelssohn, the German, the famous Jewish scholar, Moses Mendelssohn. Have you heard of Moses Mendelssohn? Yeah, okay. So Mendelssohn was the big name, you know, the big person that called for the acculturation of Jews into German society. He was the big advocate. And he has made really important breakthroughs during his lifetime, although during his lifetime German Jews did not receive civil rights, but he has made the breakthrough through his arguments, through his work, for the acculturation of Jews in Germany. And he was known for the translation of the Hebrew Bible into the German language. And so many times Mendelssohn is called, you know, is like the first reformer. But actually, if you look very carefully at what he has said, Mendelssohn probably would be better argued that he was the first modern Orthodox, in which he argued that Jews can remain loyal to the Jewish law and the Jewish lifestyle, but still be acculturated into the German society and be modern people at the same time. You can still be a Jew and a modern at the same time. So the book is an attack on Mendelssohn and his argument for acculturation. Schlesinger called Mendelssohn a Sadducee, and I was trying to think, why would he call him a Sadducee? Besides an insult, besides insulting him, I don't know why he called him a Sadducee. Okay, maybe this is the reason. Okay, so maybe this is the reason why he called him a Sadducee. It makes sense, thank you. And so Schlesinger, you know, whereas Mendelssohn was calling for the acculturation and the assimilation of Jews into German society, Mendelssohn said, no, Jews should be separated. Jews should not integrate, should not assimilate. Jews should, so if Mendelssohn suggested that Jews will change their names from Moses to Motti, yes, or from whatever Jewish name, to a regular name, you know. And if Mendelssohn said that Jews should speak German instead of Yiddish, and if Mendelssohn said that Jews should dress like any other person, and not with the unique clothes, so Schlesinger said just the opposite. Jews should not change their name from Moses to Motti. Jews should stay speaking Yiddish and not German, and Jews should not change their dress, and should not shave their beard, and should not do all those things. So now I'm going to talk about catastrophic millennialism. So this is the terminology of sociologists, yes. So this is the definition. Catastrophic millennialism involves a pessimistic view of human nature and society. Humans are so evil and corrupt that the old order has to be destroyed violently to make way for the perfect millennial kingdom. This approach adopts a radical dualistic worldview. Reality is seen in terms of good and evil, reflected in an adversary perfection of the relations between true believers and those outside of fold. So basically, catastrophic millennialism said the end of days is an event that's going to happen soon. We are righteous, they are evil, we're going to receive salvation, they are going to hell. This dualistic point of view continues on, yes, we are the good ones, we are the elect ones, we are the chosen ones, we are going to receive redemption. All the rest are just doomed. We don't need to do anything with them. We don't need to integrate with them. We don't need to speak with them. We don't need to have any take with them. God's going to come and going to take them all away. Yes, so this is catastrophic millennialism. So this is more or less what Schlesinger was making. This is the argument that he was making. So in the Talmud, there is a statement that the Messiah, son of David, will come only in a generation that is entirely guilty or entirely innocent. Yes, so if we're all going to be righteous and pray and go to the mikveh and, and take the religion very seriously and so on, and everyone will be perfect, then Messiah can come. But he can also come where everyone is wicked, besides us, of course. Yes. And he identified his period of time where all the Jews want to be modern and want to, live the old lifestyle and so on. He identified this is the period that everyone is wicked. So this is a clear indication that the end of days, this is the pessimistic view of Messianism, that this is indeed the days in which there is a possibility that salvation is at hand. So Schlesinger, for him, the proof that this is indeed the period is with the rise of what he called the Reform sect. Why? Because they desecrate the Sabbath, they intermarry, they reject the idea of miraculous redemption, and they observe the Jewish laws in a selective way. A quote, they are the Satan, a wolf in sheep's clothing. So since, from his perspective, all those modern Jews are satanic, then there's no need for Jews or good Jews and bad Jews to sit together in the same institutions. And this is why he promoted the separation and the division and the schism that took place in Hungary. Yeah. They don't need to sit in the same synagogue. And this is a picture of the big synagogue in Budapest. They don't need to sit together in the same institution, and they don't need to be together. Those who remain in the Jewish people will be absolutely righteous or absolutely evil. These are the time in which selection is being made. And here he brought another component into his argument, and this is a very interesting component. So in the Bible, we read about Moses going up to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai. And in Exodus 12:38, it says that a mixed multitude, in Hebrew it's called the Erev Rav, went up with them, with the Israelites. Yes? So when the Israelites escaped Egypt, there were not just Israelites, there were also Egyptians with them, among them. And they are called the mixed multitude. And this is how the Bible says, the mixed multitude went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. So this is the picture I found online of the of the Egyptians. So in the Bible and in the commentary, and it is associated that the golden calf that was built when Moses was up in the mountain was associated with the mixed multitude, that they were responsible for building it, yes? Because they were in their soul, in their essence. They were not Jews. And traditional Judaism, and through its commentaries over the generations, and especially in the mystical teachings, have said that in every generation, the souls of the Israelites and the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, reincarnates into new bodies. Yes, what? Okay. Reincarnates into new bodies, and during his lifetime, Schlesinger believed those who decide to go to the modern, secular aspects of Jewish life, their soul reincarnates, like it's popping up, yes? That they are the descendants of the mixed multitude rather than they have like real Jewish origin. So it's almost like a race, yes? It's like So there are the good Jews, this is one race, and there are the bad Jews, which is the other race, the mixed multitude. And he believed that during his lifetime, God actually like elevates their souls, their bad souls out, so that everybody could see. It's very clear. It's going to be very clear, who is good and who is bad. So, for his perspective, this was a test of faith. So there are all kinds of temptations outside. You can be a secular, you can be a reformer, you can be whatever, but God is testing you to see if you're still going to remain loyal to traditions, and if you pass the test, you're going to receive salvation. This is how we saw the things. This is how we saw the big picture. Okay, love and hate. Since sinners are the Erev Rav, they are the mixed multitude, there is a genetic distinction between proper Jews and the descendants of the Erev Rav. The obligation to behave peacefully does not apply in their case. So basically he said, the Talmud, the teachings of the Torah teaches us that we need to love all Jews. But they are not Jews. They are descendants of the Egyptians, yes? And therefore, the teachings forces us to hate them. This is the schism that took place in Hungary, yes? You can see now the ideological background. So this is why he basically decided to move to Jerusalem. He thought that Hungary was a lost case. There is the Orthodox have lost the war. Everyone in Hungary is going to turn into a modern person. And therefore, he advocated his followers just to leave Europe and to move to Jerusalem to save your infants and children. And this is why he went to Jerusalem in 1870. So now I'm going to talk briefly about another Hasidic rabbi, again from the same generation. His name is Rabbi Chaim Elazar Shapira, also known as the Monkacher Rebbe. So Monkach is a small town in Hungary, and he headed a Hasidic dynasty, and he was considered to be an influential figure among the radical Hasidic Jews at that period of time. And he also was much involved in this ideological worldview that I have mentioned to you, yes, which viewed their period of time as the last days before the coming of the Messiah. And he took it even one step further, and he traveled to Jerusalem in the year 1920 in order to crown King Messiah. And the man that you see here in this picture, I know this is not a good picture, his name is Rabbi Eliezer Alfandri. He was a Sephardi rabbi and a Kabbalist, a mystic. And the Monkacher Rebbe Chaim Elazar Shapira concluded that this man, Alfandri, is the embodiment of King Messiah. And this is so he traveled to Jerusalem to make it public. And I'll tell you how it ended up. This old man died during the visit. Yeah. Yeah. No, his name is Alfandri. Alfandri. This is 1920. Yeah. And which in my opinion opened up the speculation for Shapira that if Alfandri is not the Messiah, then maybe Shapira could be the Messiah. Yeah. So if I want to sum it up, so what was the ideological worldview of the Hasidic Jews at that period of time in Hungary, in Pressburg, in this community? So first, eschatology. the identification of the present time as the area preceding the coming of the Messiah because of sharp decline in religious observance. Yes? For them, the deterioration of the world of the Torah observance was the proof, the ultimate proof, that these are indeed the end of days. And this is why Rabbi Shapira was looking for a personal Messiah, that can take the role. Demonology, the identification of Jewish reform and secularism as satanic forces that seeks to thwart and trick redemption. Yes, this is why it was very important for them to identify sinners. And dualism, this demonization led to a fierce desire for separation and isolation. Yeah. And you can see these traits until today among Hasidic communities. So now, I want to make an intellectual guess, If this was the world in which Leopold Cohen has left, and put behind, what has he taken from this world to the new world? I don't know. I'm not a scholar of Leopold Cohen. But maybe, looking for a personal Messiah, identifying the time as similar to the end of days, as preceding the end of days. Maybe this is something that he took to the new world that he developed for himself. Okay, my presentation is done.
So while we're waiting, can we get a question from the group for Dr. Inbari? Did you raise your hand, Stuart?
Oh.
Right.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I was just wondering the role of mysticism and how it played into the
Messianism?
Mysticism.
Mysticism. Okay.
How it played into the Erev Rat, because if mysticism is denounced in the Torah, why are they not considered sinners as well? I don't know.
You need to explain your question a little bit more. I don't think mysticism is denounced in the Torah.
Well, not denounced, but like astrology and like
Okay.
sorcery and things like that. And so like the miracle working rabbis, how come that's not considered a sin if they're doing these supernatural practices?
Yeah, but Jewish culture, traditions over the years have developed strong mystical traditions, It's called Kabbalah. And it actually started before Kabbalah. Kabbalah is the product of the 12th century in Spain, but we know that Jews have been practicing some kinds of mystical traditions already from the 2nd and 3rd century. So, this is part of Jewish culture, yeah? And Hasidic Judaism actually is very strongly connected to mysticism. And so, no, it's not considered a sinful practice. However, having said that, over the years, the rabbis understood that practicing mysticism is a dangerous practice. Yes, so they try to restrict it in age and in the level of religiosity and so on. So not everyone can practice. But what has happened with Hasidic Judaism, that they kind of try to put it on the head, by which to expand the practice of mysticism and to make it popular as an important task of becoming a Hasidic follower. You have the microphone, so you have the you have the upper hand.
What I'm going to say is going to seem funny, but it's not funny at all. There are people in the Christian world and in the Messianic Jewish world, believe it or not, who, when talking about Donald Trump, talk in similar terms as you were describing with Alfondri, that, believe it or not, and I'm telling you this because you can publish an article and get very, very famous from this article. They refer to the Democrats as Democrats. They look upon the Democrats as a satanic group that's opposing the work of God through Donald Trump, who is looked upon as being, in some sense, a servant of God. So these dynamics you hear here about eschatology, about end times rhetoric, the idea that there are forces of darkness working to corrupt the paths of righteousness, the attribution of demonic association with those forces that are looked upon as being contaminating, believe it or not, in some kind of a mixture of politics and religion, is being manifest in our day by somewhat peripheral people. It would be interesting to see an article written that shows the parallel between the structure of movement dynamics.
Yeah, I can say that these articles are already published. Yes, yeah. The scholars have already, especially sociologists, have noticed that there are some very strong similarities of movements within the Jewish, the Christian, and also the Muslim world that kind of create this sharp dualism between the righteous and the evil and the end of days. So this is a world religion kind of phenomena, and this is why I've used the sociological definition, of catastrophe, because it have been things like that have happened in old monotheistic world religions, yeah. And it's not surprising that now it also translates into the Donald Trump. And I know exactly what you're saying, because he tweeted that he said, there is a pastor saying that I am the king of the Jews. Yeah.
Dr. Idel, to what extent was the Hungarian Hasidic movement devastated by the Holocaust?
Oh, to a very large extent. So the Hasidic rabbis, the Hungarians especially, the radicals, they saw any type of change as something that should be opposed in the most radical way. And this also included immigration. So they knew that if their Hasidic community would immigrate from Hungary to the United States or to Palestine or to whatever, South America or whatever, they will change their lifestyle, because change is a must. And therefore they encourage their followers to stay in Europe. And this is the tragedy of Hasidic Judaism. They encouraged their followers not to immigrate, because they could not fathom Hitler. And they could not see, what is Nazi anti-Semitism. They thought that, okay, anti-Semitism, Jews have had to deal with anti-Semites, throughout history. So, and Jews survived. And so they thought, okay, it might be hard, it might be difficult, but we will survive. And therefore, they encouraged their followers not to immigrate, to stay in Europe. And this was the tragedy of Hasidic Judaism, because they lost their power during the Holocaust.
Hi there. Okay, I have two questions if you want to answer them, so I'll make them really fast. So one, I'm curious, have you ever seen any successful examples of sort of bridging the two worldviews? So if this is sort of the Hasidic view that we will remain righteous and there are Jews out there that are really racing towards evil, but they're not really Jews. There's kind of this separation mentality. So one worldview versus the other worldview, like, no, we are still Jewish. We're Reformed Jews, but we're still Jewish. Have you ever successfully seen that be bridged, where they can start conversations again? And
yeah. If you're coming from this point of view, then you don't seek any conversation. Okay. There's no point in it. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So second question, then real fast. It was curious when you're talking about Zionism, how it's sort of a progressive movement, like first return to the land, then the temple, then Sanhedrin, and then the monarchy. I know there's the Temple Institute, which is already talking about the third temple. So just curious, are there groups also that are already trying to pinpoint who might be the next monarch, or like keep track of, royal lineage?
Yeah, well, I can say that if Mitch will invite me again next year, I'll talk about the temple people. if you really want me, I wrote a book about it. It's called Jewish Fundamentalism and the Temple Mount. So
There was in the 1940s, we all know the kind of dentist are professional, yes? So in the 1940s, there was another dentist living in Palestine who declared himself as the king of Jews. He claimed that he was a descendant of the King David, and therefore he should become the king of the Jews, and he was advertising that, and he appealed to the British government, insisting on them acknowledging him as the king of Jews, and he should, like England had some monarchy, so that the Jews in Israel, which settled there according to the British mandate, so they should acknowledge him as the king of Israel. So there was indeed a candidate for becoming the king of the Jews.
Yeah, so, and let me just say a few more words about it. So these groups like the Temple Institute, they are trying to rebuild the temple's instruments. They are making, architectural plans, so how to build the temple. They are doing all those things. They are trying to identify who is a priest and who's not a priest, so that because the temple has to be performed by priests and so on. And I've never heard of them saying anything about who is the king, but I'm not going to be surprised if this is not something they are doing it secretly. They're looking for the red heifer and so on. So they are doing all the steps that are needed. They reestablished the Sanhedrin. They call it the Sanhedrin, whatever. So they are doing everything. I never heard them say anything about the king, but I'm not going to be surprised if there is some movement toward that, yes.
I had I'll also try two questions. Quick, like first of all, like, could you clarify a little bit, like, the resistance to change and to modernity? Because, like, it seems they are not adverse to, for instance, using the automobile or taking the airplane or modern medicine. So could you pinpoint a little bit more the resistance to change?
Yeah, so the biggest resistors to change in the world, I guess, probably are the Amish in Pennsylvania, yes? Yeah. So they didn't go all the way like them. Yeah, they still use some modern tools. Why they accept some level of change then?
Yeah, so it's like it seems to be more like against modern ideas, right? Like, and some accommodation is going on, yeah. Or
and I can say that even the Taliban or Al Qaeda and so, which want to go back to the days of the Prophet Muhammad. Yeah, so they still are using the Toyotas, yes. Yeah. so Muhammad didn't ride any Toyota, as far as the Quran tells us. Yes, so there is some level of acceptance that there are tools that can be used in order to promote resistance to change, and these are modern tools. And this is the paradox of all these fundamentalist movements, that they are willing to use some tools to promote anti-modernity.